Good evening, everyone. As Timothy was so kind to just say, I'm Matthew Ketchum. I work with him, as well as with Gambate 365. So tonight, we have four very distinguished panel participants to come up. So if I could call up first Mark Dytham of Pechakucha and Home for All. Followed by Mayo Hota of SoftBank and the Tomodachi Initiative. Peter Franken with Safecast. And finally, Neil Van Wow with Gambate 365. First, I'd like to say thank you very much for being with us tonight. Really looking forward to having this conversation. Before we get started, just to give the audience a little bit of context about what it is everybody here does, I would like to ask for a little bit of an introduction about what it is you do. So Mark, starting with you.
It's okay to sit down? Or do
yes.
Sure. So my name is Mark Dytham. I'm an architect here in Tokyo, and been in Japan over 20 years, let's just say that, a little bit longer. So I run an architectural practice called Klein Dytham Architecture, and you probably know our best work or our most well-known work is in Daikanyama, which is Daikanyama Tea Site, the bookstore. I also am the co-founder of Super Deluxe, which is just below us, and it's an art space in Tokyo from where we've been running that 13 years now, and from where we run Pachakucha Night, or we started Pachakucha Night, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I'm also a board member on an NPO called Home for All, and that was established by Pritzker Prize-winning architect Toyo Ito 3 or 4 months after the disaster in Tohoku. And he realized as all of the temporary homes were being built very efficiently and very quickly, there was a need for something more, and we're a part of an organization building community centers in the areas of temporary housing.
Hi, this is Maya Hota. Thank you for having me. As Matt introduced, I'm working for SoftBank. You probably know it's a mobile company. And I joined the company about 12 years ago, and I was doing finance. And I'm from Gifu, so didn't have any Tohoku connection. But since 2011, it kind of changed, like disaster changed my life. I started to help high school students in Tohoku with the US Embassy, and it's under Tomodachi Initiative. And since 2012, summer 2012, I have been taking 600 high school students to UC Berkeley. That's where our CEO Masayoshi Son is from. And also, like I was a high school exchange student in the States. I grew up in very small country area in Gifu, but like for me to travel to the States at the age of 17 really changed my life. So this project is coming from my personal story as well. I want to give the same kind of opportunity to the students in Tohoku. And I run this program is based, the goal is leadership. So we motivate these high school students to make actions. That's what we do. Thank you.
My name is Peter Franken. I'm from Holland. Been living in Japan more than 25 years. My connections with Tohoku are obviously, I'm also not from Tohoku, but my wife and my family is from Tohoku, and actually I got married in Ishinomaki, so I have for the last, for also 25 years, I know a little bit about Ishinomaki and Tohoku quite a bit. My professional life started in Japan as a researcher, but I've spent most of my life in financial world working on delivery of IT systems. Currently, I'm working at Monex Securities, and I'm their CTO. In case you don't know Monex Securities, it's one of the leading online brokerages in Japan. 5 years ago, obviously, with my personal connections with Tohoku, it was a very personal event. Lots of things happened on the day of the event, and lots of things happened after that. But it triggered me to do something, and It so happened to be that Fukushima was in between myself and my family-in-law, and that became the focal point of the area where I decided to do something about. So, and that triggered Safecast together with a few other people. We started that 5 years ago, and we have been measuring radiation ever since. And with the project, lots of other things evolved from that, and I'll talk a bit about it a little bit later. But really, that has been my personal story for the last 5 years. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Neil Van Wow. I'm from Canada originally, and this year will be 30 years in Japan. My work is in IT, a bit like Peter. And actually, what my company does is digital signage. So a lot of the, some of the big screens you see in Tokyo with videos on them, and also train stations, that kind of thing. And what happened when the disaster hit in 2011, the first thing that happened in Tokyo was they turned off all the digital signage. But that gave me some time to think about things. And when I thought about what could I do to help that was related to what I could offer, I thought that very shortly after the disaster, we saw the news turn quite negative, thanks to Fukushima. Countries were talking about boycotting Japanese products, and they didn't want to come to Japan. And so I thought the first thing that we could do is just try to get out some positive news about what's going on, because right after the disaster, people were already starting up projects all over the place. I mean, Peter's project started within days, and these kind of great initiatives were going on, and just trying to get the word out to the world, I thought was something that would be helpful. And that's how Gambate 365 started. And we've made over 400 videos so far, and we got involved in quite a few other projects too.
All right, so with that, I'd kind of like to kick off the panel. And to begin with, Mark, I'd kind of like to address what it is you do. I think you're in a pretty, kind of, well, definitely an interesting situation, but also rather unique in that with Home for All, you've created, I think, what, it's 14
homes,
14 different homes across the Tohoku region. And kind of at its base, that's creating space, right? Inhabitable space, livable space. And so you've got those that you're creating, but then you also have Pechakucha, which is sort of not the opposite, but it's kind of, you know, the match to it, the match, in that it attracts people to fill space and do something in that space, which basically Pechakucha is kind of the exchange of ideas. Both of these projects are rather well known worldwide. And I'm curious, in your experience and with watching, especially with Pechakucha, which is now 13 years old, the growth over time across the world compared to how it's happened in Chile and how it's happened in LA and how it's happened even in Tokyo, what are kind of the idiosyncrasies that you see developing and kind of, and the things that are being learned from how these two projects are developing in Tohoku? What are the kind of things that you've learned from that?
Okay, well, first of all, with Pechakucha, it's Japanese for chit-chat. It's really a show and tell for anybody, and we started it 12 years ago, just downstairs in Super Deluxe, and I'll talk about it more in the Pechakucha presentation a little bit later. We're just a year before the earthquake here. There was the other earthquake in Haiti, and working with Cameron Sinclair from Architecture for Humanity, he was, I think, the second person to win the TED Prize. He called on us and said, is there something that you could help us with to bring your Pechakucha community together? We're in about 400 cities by then. And within a month, we held a global night where we united all of our cities around the world, and I'll show you a slide about that later. And I stayed up for 24 hours on Skype, and every 8 minutes we moved from one city to the next, and people gave presentation. We raised $100,000 And along with Architecture for Humanity and Ben Stiller, we built a school in Haiti, which was pretty amazing. Little did we know, a year later, the shoe would be on the other foot, really, a year and a month later. There was the earthquake here. What was amazing is the community, Pachaccha global community, came together and said, well, let's try and do something for Japan. And we started off this project called Inspire Japan. And the idea is that Japan inspires the whole of the design world. And it was the design world's idea that they should really inspire us. And that's how this Pachaccha Inspire project started. And we have probably about 200 or 300 presentations now of really great ideas that have happened up in the Tohoku area, which are online, and it's a way we can share. Now, we've got a lot of information from Haiti, and that project's built out, as I'll talk about later, and we are in Nepal now. We've done a project there in Nepal, and also in Christchurch. So it's been really interesting. There's a lot of similarities we're finding there with these earthquakes and these different disaster scenarios. And I think that we're in a very interesting moment now that we can actually record this because of the internet. And it's our first chance, and that's what Peter's really doing with Safecast as well. So it's a great learning process, and I think what we've learned with the Home for All project, where we're building these community centres, there's lots of learning. I think learning from Tohoku is a really big subject to get our teeth into as we go forward, because there are many, many lessons learned. And I think we have to digest that and then sort of pass that on.
Right. You say the kind of the learning from Tohoku, right? I think a lot of the conversations that happen right now is kind of what are the things that we can take from elsewhere, probably from Haiti, from Christchurch, from everywhere else around the world, and sort of apply here. But very recently, I've been hearing actually quite the opposite. What you're talking about right now is how can we use Tohoku as a learning experience? How can we use Tohoku as kind of a base from which to saunter forth, to sally forth, to move on? And up in Tohoku with the spaces that you built, and you've had a few Pechakucha functions up there as well.
Correct. Yeah, we had the first Pachaccha night happened a month after the earthquake in Sendai, and without any electricity, by the way. It was really touch and go. And we had the Inspire Japan event in Tokyo City View, so a floor above us, and we got hit by another big aftershock that night. It was quite an exciting night. But yeah, we do lots of Pachacchas up in the Tohoku region. Again, it's a way to gather information, and these are all recorded. They're all online. They also on the Inspire Japan channel, which is really super interesting.
So Pachaccha in a space really kind of becomes a crucible for ideas, really, for trading. And that's kind of the crux of the question as well that we're addressing right now is, given the specific circumstances of Tohoku and the learning that people have had either in NPOs or either locals up there who are working there, how are those, what are the things that people are realizing about?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the length of time it takes. I come from a new town in England. The reason I'm an architect is I grew up in a new town called next door to a new town called Milton Keynes, and they built 250,000 homes there over 25 years. Yeah, 250,000 homes were destroyed in Tohoku. And to rebuild isn't something that happens in a year, 2 years, 5 years. It's going to take 20 years at least to rebuild. And we're in a lot more complex situation with planning laws. People are not sure whether they're allowed to build. Can they build on the floodplain or not? There's a lot of confusion. So compared to a clean sheet of a new town, which takes 25 years, it's a very complex thing. And I think that's the big message we've got to get out, that the healing takes time. But there are lots of great stories and great, amazing things that happen. A lot of positivity there. That's all we see. And I think that's the message we've got to try and get out and say, learn from what's going on there. And beyond that, really use the learning to multiply around the world with different events. I don't want to take too many key points away from the other speakers. But I mean, there are so many people here in the room that have done amazing projects in Tohoku, which have spread beyond Tohoku. Even our videographer and photographer tonight, Brian, who runs Tohoku, that's gone beyond the borders of Japan. It's gone around the world. And
this actually reminds me of Mayo, sort of your work with SoftBank and the Tomodachi Initiative. And the Tomodachi Initiative started very soon after
Yeah, the release was made in February 2012.
Okay,
But yeah,
okay.
we started thinking about that around the summer 2011.
Right, right. And so with SoftBank specifically, what you're doing is sending Tohoku high school, senior high school, so seniors in high school,
Yeah.
over to kind of a leadership training 3-week, I think it is.
Yes.
Seminar over at UC Berkeley. And with that, they're obviously learning a lot of things about leadership and about teamwork and all of these wonderful things. But then they're bringing that back to their communities in Tohoku, be it in where I was in Miyako, be it down in Sendai, be it wherever. Kind of moving on from what Mark has done, or at least what we were talking about with Mark, about kind of giving space for community to happen. What I kind of see your organization doing is, so there's this community, but what exactly are they doing? Where are their skills? Where are these from? And the Tomodachi Initiative seems to be trying to give them those skills so that these communities that naturally form actually end up becoming something much stronger than they could have been. With that being said, the Tomodachi Initiative, or actually what I'm curious about is, in your experience in the 4 years now that this program has been running, what are kind of the key takeaways that these students who come back, who return, what is it that they're kind of gravitating towards? What are the key points that they're learning and then reapplying to their home communities, and what have they accomplished through that?
Yeah, about 4 years ago, I started this program, and in the beginning, I didn't get any students applying for this. We said 300 students, free US tour. I thought everybody will apply for it, but nobody really did. And I didn't receive enough application until like 2 weeks ago. And I started running all over Tohoku. There are 300 high schools, but I visited about 100 of them, knocked every high schools. Then many high school students are like, sounds good, but these students are busy, so taking them away for 3 weeks to the States is not so good for their career, for their future, university entrance exam and all that. So I was like, really? Oh my God. Then I talked to these teachers and tell them why this opportunity is important for the students. Then first year, finally, because of knocking these doors, I received 2,000 applications, and I picked 300. And I went to the States with them, and it was only going to be like summer camp with leadership learning experience. But however, after a week or so, students start coming to me and say, oh, Mayo-san, I want to do something. What should I do after I return? I'm going back in 2 weeks. But with this learning and with this team and nakama, friends, why should we do this? And I was like, just think about it. And then like a few days later, this group of students came up to me and said, oh, I want to make actions. I want to support my area, my community. I said, okay, yeah, do that. And then from there, I spent a lot of nights with the students and came up with many actions. I'll share a few of them. One student from Naraha, which is like about less than 10 kilos away from Daiichi Plantation, in Fukushima. And her dad was working for Toden, TEPCO. So, and everybody around the community was talking bad things about her dad. Then what happened to this mom and daughter, Haruka-chan, is that they stopped talking because of stress, because of moving. Haruka moved a few times within a few months, traveling place to place within Fukushima, finding new settlements, while her dad was still working in TEPCO, didn't come back, didn't tell them what's going on in the plantation. Then she couldn't talk for a while. Her mom started to lose her hair. Then finally, about a year later, they started to live in Iwaki, which is like 20-30 kilos away from the plantation, because that was the closest place the safe place that they could find close to their hometown. Then she joined the program. She couldn't talk so much, but she joined the program and found really nice friends. And what happened is that she started to honor the community.
Yeah.
She started to love Iwaki. She started to feel like she wants to return to the Iwaki that where they accepted her family.
Yes.
And what she did was to create bus tour.
Bus
Because Iwaki, number one business is tourism. But however, they lost that all in 2011 and 12. She knew that. So in order to help the economy in Iwaki, it would be a great thing, or like that's something that she could do. And she communicated with the HIS, which is one of the biggest travel agency, and started to run bus tour, high school bus tour, run by high school students. It was really fun. I joined the bus tour a few times. High school students take you to where they want to.
Right.
Show.
So it's kind of a local.
Yeah, local.
Okay.
Going to local restaurant, going to local swimming pool, things like that was really fun. And then the good thing is that like high school students is gonna talk what happened on March 11th, what kind of experience they had, and how they are living, how's the situation there. It was really strong, and about 300 people paid about 2万円, which is like $200 US to come to this tour.
Which kind of reminds me of another topic that you're kind of interested in called post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
PTG, as it were. Which, of course, there's post-traumatic stress disorder, which is kind of a negative thing. But this term that's being thrown around occasionally, I've heard it a number of times now, really kind of speaks to the positives that can come from these sort of necessary rebuilding times, right?
Yeah, exactly. Have you heard PTG, post-traumatic growth? We always talk about negative things after disaster. People are hurt. People has traumatized. People has trauma. But however, she did have strong trauma. She couldn't talk for a while, and her mom losing her hair and all that. But after a year or so, she started to make actions. And she's now studying in Koriyama and wants to become architect to rebuild the community.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so it's No, I think it's a great story to introduce PTG to that to you.
Great, thank you very much. Moving up, Peter, with what you and Safecast have managed to do, I think it's a wonderfully DIY kind of movement that really, when things can't happen that need to happen, well, you find what you find, and you can do what you do, and you get it done. And so in Tohoku, I think there is, kind of with like what Mayo was talking about, there are these skills that you can learn from abroad or from studying elsewhere, and bring them back to your community. And like what with Mark does with Home for All and with Pechakucha, there needs to be a community to actually apply those things to. What I'm really kind of astounded by with Safecast is sort of the mental brawn that it kind of represents. And I'm curious, in a place like Tohoku, certainly there's tourism, has been a part of the economy for quite a long time, but something like basically development, particularly IT development, isn't exactly something that is so well related with Tohoku. Given the circumstance of 311 and how Safecast kind of dealt with that, where there was a dearth of information, you created a system that allows for that information to come in. What sort of other developments do you see Tohoku offering, or the space that Tohoku has? What kind of other developments do you think that Tohoku kind of approach in the coming years?
Very good question, very difficult to answer. And let me try to say why I think it's kind of a difficult question, because if, for the sake of argument, the earthquake is a random event that's just happened to hit that area. But you need to understand a little bit about that part of Japan to understand where we are today. And, as I mentioned, My family is from Miyagi Prefecture, and I've been going there for over 25 years. Before the earthquake hit, it was already having lots of difficulty, and primarily economical difficulty. Ishinomaki, the city I know best, was basically in recession for the last 20 years, and that is a major problem, and it's very. The problem is not only for Tohoku. It's basically wherever the big cities are a huge magnet in Japan, and basically they were already taking lots of people away. So there were already lots of people worrying about that problem, and they were working on that. And the earthquake, maybe what you were talking about, people always talk about the negative, but it had also, maybe in a sad way, also positive, that it put kind of the spotlight on all these problems. Lots of people volunteered to go to Ishinomaki and came back and said, we have to rebuild the center of the city. Yes. And I said, but that center was already in deep trouble before the earthquake hit. And to rebuild it is not rebuilding the houses. You have to really understand why it got there in the first place. So I think the earthquake not necessarily is the only context that was happening. Now, if we look forward, there's lots of things that are happening, but I know of some of grassroots things that I just, last few weeks just happened to know about, and lots of interesting things are happening. But one of the big challenges is remaining that young people tend to leave the area because there's just not enough industry or jobs or things that they find interesting. But where there is a push, there's also there are people that start to rethink and say we have to do something. We have lots of volunteers we work with, young people, older people, and through our volunteer network we have met lots of people that are trying to do something positive with it. Sometimes successfully, and sometimes frustratingly, it's not going anywhere. One of the things I just heard about literally last week, one of our volunteers was talking about an initiative to create a memory of what happened over the last 5 years.
With, if I'm not mistaken, that's on an iPhone and kind of the, what's it called? Not AI.
Well, no, it's more kind of an archiving.
Okay.
It's an MPO, and they just launched it yesterday. And the purpose is to meticulously archive everything that happened. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to create a memory for the future. And I think it's an excellent idea because it's not it's not a shiny project, but it is very important to build a memory. Safecast is building part of that memory. We're measuring radiation, and it's not just measuring for today, but it's also for scientific purposes, for people to understand how things are changing. So that is something I heard about. Another thing I just read about is the same person. He was part of another initiative to start a vineyard in Fukushima. And I think they're kicking it off also this week. And they kicked it off last October. They just planted the first vines, and they hope to have vines 3 years from now. Yeah. There has quite some initiatives to turn the land into something useful, and there is quite some activity around solar and alternative energy. I think initially lots of people tried to do solar, and it kind of backfired for quite of the projects, but that has started kind of an industry of how do we generate electricity.
Right.
So some of the solar plants are coming online right now, but also people are looking into alternate ways of generating energy. And I think that is creating some interesting technology for Tohoku, definitely. I think there's also just young people that say, I would want to leverage the advantage of not living in the city. Mm-hmm. Tohoku, if you live in Tohoku, the cost of living is significantly lower than if you live in Tokyo. And some of our other volunteers, they started, they run small IT companies, and they're actively trying to make sure that the students that come out of Aichi University, Fukushima University, join those companies. And interestingly enough, that is kind of successful. People are, young people are kind of saying, oh wow, we can have a cool experience outside of Tokyo too, because that's kind of the problem. If the countryside, it's not Shibuya, it's not, it's not that experience, but these companies look like little Silicon Valley companies when you're in there, and the people that are in there are having a great time, and they're doing amazing work, in technologies around, bio companies or medical related technologies. It's pretty high tech. So I think there are some things happening that are definitely lifting Tohoku up a bit from the rest.
Well, there also seems to be, with the few unfortunately, the few kind of big success stories so far with kind of younger companies, call them startups, call them, you know, smaller conglomerates, of younger people moving out there, mostly in IT, in order to sort of escape the red tape. Because that's really kind of what Tokyo does represent, to an extent, is red tape all over the place. And in order to kind of promote and support kind of development that's new and young, Tohoku represents a really excellent option. And a lot of the companies that I've seen going out there have this kind of pragmatism about them. It's sort of like a no BS kind of stance where, you know, here's what we're making and here's what it does and here it is, right? As opposed to having sort of this maybe not glitzy, but sort of kind of image conscious. What do you call? Well, yeah, image conscious.
Slick?
Yeah, sleek, I guess.
Right.
With those sort of developments going on up there, do you see those continuing? Is there kind of a positive progression moving on with that?
Well, you know, I just kind of scratching my head what you're kind of asking, but I'm just thinking aloud. It's not a secret that Japanese in general have not great skills in presenting themselves. I mean, if you go to presentations, it's rarely exciting. It's typically, you know, and it is very fact driven. You know, here's all the information and a tremendous amount of little, you know, but there is no skills in that, and that is changing a bit. And definitely one of the things that happened with the big earthquake is that these TED Talks, TED Tohoku, TED everything, TED anywhere, that was actually one of the big things that happened in terms of presentational skills in Japan. Because before that, nobody knew what TED was, literally, but suddenly that became a way to organize and talk, and also it's uplifting, and TED is very slick. And the people that organize it, I know some of the people behind it, very, very focused and professional team. So those things started to happen, and suddenly people had to stand up and be slick. Right. Because TED presentations are supposed to be not boring.
Or Pachakcha presentations.
Right. So that connects also to the Silicon Valley culture of selling yourself, which is, I think cultural Japanese are not very good in that, but that is changing. I've met lots of young people that are doing startups, that are trying to do things, and they're getting increasingly better standing on a stage and selling their wares. But what is also interesting is what I've noticed over the years being here. Normally, if you would go to a presentation, you wouldn't be only the presenter not having the skills, but nobody would ask a question either.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that is also changing. Last year, we organized, Safecast organized its annual big event. And last year, we had a huge event that was co-hosted together with the city of Koriyama. The mayor himself sponsored the event together with us. And we had about 300 people that came to the event. And primarily young people, high school students, university students, or younger people. And we talked about, in that event, about radiation, but we primarily talked about innovation. How do you do stuff yourself? How do you use all these technologies? How do you do Safecast if so we basically were talking about, kind of knowledge transfer as to how do you become active? How do you do all these things? And what was interesting is we got tremendous amount of questions. I was really impressed because specifically standing up and having a question in a group with 300 people is a challenge. So I thought, wow, if I go back 5 years ago, so one of the things that kind of is happening is people are picking up on these things. The internet obviously is a key facilitator in that, and with that, the rise of things like Line, Facebook, all these things became accelerated because people realized that the usual phone didn't work. We need other ways to communicate. And that also created, I think, in a way, this better communication. How do you better communicate what you think? And I don't think it's so important that people are good at presentation skills. Mark, but it does help to communicate your ideas. And Pachakucha is another amazing example.
I'm curious to ask, have you seen kind of a development over the years, particularly after 3/11?
Yeah, well, we really struggled when Pachakcha started to get anybody in Japan, any cities in Japan, to start a Pachakcha night. We don't ask cities I've only asked one person out of 907 cities I've only asked my best friend in Chicago to run an event.
Right,
People have to ask us. And that's the way there's a passion there. If people want to start it, they'll keep it running and keep it going. If they're not interested, or we ask people, it fails immediately. So we were desperate to get cities in Japan, but nobody was interested. We now have 25 cities in Japan, really strong network. And this is really post 3.11 too, yeah. And you're absolutely right that the presentation standard has increased, has got better. People are happy to stand up and talk about what they do, from students even to older people too, yeah. So Ted's done a tremendous job. We hope Pachax is doing a similar sort of job too. But it's a really great point, and I think we'll touch on this as the evening goes on. But I mean, it's actually been, in a very bizarre way, a very good thing for Tohoku, this, and all of these stories, these positive stories and positive change. And I think it puts Tohoku in probably the best position, or for Fukushima Prefecture, the whole area of Tohoku, in a very, very strong position going forward. How it's going to challenge the issues that we've got that rural Japan has, and so this pruning away and allowing the area to come forward again is really interesting.
And I know you mentioned, and I'm quoting here, positive stories and positive change, right? What a wonderful notion. That's really kind of the crux of sort of how Neil, with Gambate 365, really what you were focused on and are still focused on when Gambate 365 started, was sort of, hey, yeah, there's kind of all this ugly stuff out there, but if you keep looking at the ugly stuff, you get worse and worse and worse off. And there's some great things happening. There's some really great initiatives. There's some great people. There's some great ideas. And this is the sort of stuff that really isn't getting broadcast. This is sort of the stuff that really isn't getting kind of any airtime, really, and not getting noticed. And that's kind of how Gambate 365 started, but you ended up working with more specific companies over the time. What I'm curious is with the content that Gambate 365 really kind of tries to focus on producing and on promulgating and broadcasting, versus sort of the typical story of, or the typical image of what Tohoku is. Can you comment on sort of, I personally think that there's probably quite a large divide between the two things. I'm wondering, your take on how big or how small that divide is, and how do you plan, and how does Gambate 365 really kind of plan on approaching that?
Well, first of all, don't consider ourselves a media. We're kind of like, if anything, we're like PR. So one of the things that really struck me when I got involved with Tohoku was the sheer scale of the disaster. And I think that's true for everybody that goes up there. You get involved with, for example, one town, but there's all these towns up the coast that have, and what happened, even though they all got hit by a tsunami and an earthquake, and then Fukushima's kind of special, but even all these towns that got hit by a tsunami, the way that affected the town is unique for each town. And then there's so many, there's the scale of the disaster, but there's also the scale of the recovery, because that's the other thing that I found out, is the more places we went, the more groups we met. We met somebody, and then this person's doing this project, and then there's these other people, and sometimes they know each other, and sometimes they don't know each other, and they're working right beside each other. So there's so much going on. One of the first things I thought of was, wouldn't it be great if we could just sort of have some kind of database that would, that everybody could meet each other, match. And that's not that like easy, and it hasn't. I think there are little attempts at that, but there's nothing sort of overreaching. But the scale, and then all of these little projects, and they all end up being about community.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
At some scale, and everybody here who's sitting up here is involved. What they're involved in is turned into a community. Started from community and became a bigger community, and that's what makes it exciting. So what we really did was just find people and ask them, what are you doing? And then try to record that and try to get it out. And doing that, just that exercise, it has so many, when you ask somebody what they're doing and they're passionate about it, it automatically comes across as positive. And if you can record that and get it to people, it really, you know, when people, the best way for people to make connections, of course, is person to person. But since we can't, we're all spread out, video and these days social media and all these, the internet has been such an enabler for communication and creating communities. I mean, Peter's is such a great example of a community that started. It started, although it was born out of what happened in Fukushima, but it didn't start in Fukushima. It started from the first, it was global. Right, Peter? Yeah.
Yes, we started actually in Tokyo, but we were a global project within hours. Yeah. And we literally within, it's amazing, we had a Skype, we used Skype to connect all the people, and we had a 24/7 Skype call that lasted about 3 to 4 weeks nonstop. So it was on always, and people could just hop in and out. And I had it on all the time, so my family kept on waking up at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and somebody came online, and we started to talk, and we kept on working on it. But it was really a very international thing, and we actually didn't go to Fukushima until the 5th week, for logical reasons that, you know, we didn't even know what we were doing in the first 5 weeks. I'll talk about it later. But before we had our feet on the ground, we already had, you know, 100 people somehow connecting into that, and that created a massive little community with tremendous amount of, as you said, passion to do something, but also very, very focused. So one of the things we were blessed with is that we got lots of people to join that were very focused to do something very specific, which was very difficult. You know, it may now look kind of trivial, but at that time we were really wandering around, and we made lots of mistakes initially before we kind of started to see what would get us there.
And kind of another thing that I'm really interested about is a lot of, particularly with Safecast and with Pachakcha, that's a lot of kind of, so, you know, here's this place that people go to.
Sorry to cut across here. The other thing is that there's a physicality to everything we do, even with Neil's projects, to going and asking people what's going on, how they're feeling. But there is this physical moment with you, with people with their iPhones and their radiation counters and things, and with what you do with students. I think this is what's really different, I think, compared to, let's say, Facebook or Twitter or all these things where it's digital to digital. We're very much digital to physical, or physical back to digital. And that's where the longevity of these projects is succeeding. And I think that that's a really big change or something new for me. And how do you keep people interested in this? It is 5 years on. It's a boring story. If you look at it from outside, it isn't hitting CNN anymore. Well, it will today and tomorrow, and then it'll be forgotten for another year. But I think what you're doing, and, you know, what everybody here is doing is really amazing. And this just dawning on me, this physicality of things, physicality of community is very important.
I think one element of how do you keep a community going is been something for Safecast being a continuous learning process. When we started it, we actually never started it to be a 5-year project. Definitely not. So we were focused on immediate generation of information so that people would know what was happening. And it was maybe 2-3 months, or, you know, when we started it was very, very, you know, problem is here, what do we do? And 5 years on, it has gone into it's gone into a very different direction. But what happened is that as we were doing this, we saw that people were pulling us. So it's kind of the power of pull. We weren't pushing anything. People were pulling us in. They said, wow, you know, do more, do this. Can you help us here, whatever. And that is essential for a community is that there has to be a common goal or a common vision of we want this. The moment you remove that, then you start pushing it, then you'll find out that it dies. And that, you know, you see other similar communities where there is a push, but there is no pull. And we started to realize that is kind of the force. You know, the forest, right? Of how, but it's really the forest, and and that's how we changed over time. Listening, you know, tapping into the forest and say, how do we make sure that we can keep on doing this? And it is not something like, I think it is so great, let's all measure radiation outside. And most people will say, are you nuts? Measuring radiation is dangerous, right? So it's not something natural. When I was the first one to drive into Fukushima with 3 other volunteers. It was a self-selected group. Nobody, we didn't say, hey, now we need 5 people, can you, tomorrow morning. It was a really self-selected group. But once we were there, we found people that were able to pull. And that really allowed us to move forward. If we would still be going to Tohoku to measure radiation, we would have stopped it years ago. So that pull is, I think, very, very important. And you see it in social networks is, once you see where the pull is, you understand it. But if there's no pull, it tends to, once the initial force is gone, it goes down.
And I think you're talking about self-selecting groups. This has to be one of the last comments, I think. But I think it was surprising, Mayo, when you said that out of 2,000, or you got 2,000 applications and ended up having to select 3. I mean, 300 is still kind of a large body, especially for, not a metropolitan area. That's a lot of applicants. That's many more than, honestly speaking, I would kind of expect from the area that you're dealing with and we're dealing with. There seems to be, especially among the younger groups, well, the younger generation, as it were, that sounds like a lot of interest in maybe not getting out, but going somewhere different and learning a skill and then bringing it back and starting to communicate and starting to generate communities and things like that. Is that, that's happening, right?
Yeah, it is happening. But can I ask you something? How many of you were in Japan in 1995? Thank you, like half of them. That's when Kobe earthquake happened. The death was less than half compared to Tohoku. But what happened in Kobe was that after 5 years, so now, all the temporary housings were removed. Mm-hmm. And what's going on in Tohoku is that I just read it in newspaper a few days ago. The temporary housing will continue until 2020 at least.
Right.
So continuing something is very powerful. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm thinking. And also the difference between Kobe and this earthquake in 2011 is economic. Mm-hmm. In 1995, Japanese economy was still growing. So rebuilding was equal to reconstruction. Mm-hmm. So after rebuilding, removing all the temporary housings, everything was fixed. Mm-hmm. But however, in Tohoku, the things are different. Mm-hmm. Population is decreasing already in Japan. Mm-hmm. Economy is not growing so much. Mm-hmm. But however, there are things in Tohoku that we can learn in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. For example, like community building. Right. They are really good at it. Mm-hmm. They are really good to connect people within the community. Something that we don't have. If you live in Tokyo, do you know your neighbors? No. I only know one neighbor. So that's normal, but in Tohoku, the connection is very strong. And these high school students, that they are now in college, most of them are in college, they are making little actions. Mm-hmm. They are connecting to communities as well. Mm-hmm. And that is going to change in 5-10 years. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm believing.
It's made a big change in the architectural community here, and actually the way that Japanese architects design. One of the reasons I came to Japan was because everything was perfect and everything was beautiful. But architects operating in the Tohoku region had to make do and mend with anything they could get their hands on. And the same for us and the same for Toyoito. Toyoito are Pritzker Prize-winning architects, Sejima-san, Pritzker Prize-winning architects. That's like the Nobel show of architecture. Have all done buildings up there with materials they've begged, borrowed, and stolen, and things that are not optimum. They're not the most stylish things, and they've put it together.
And they do it.
And in fact, their second home for all they built won the Venice Biennale grand prize in the architecture section, which was really, really amazing. Just made from all the recycled woods and logs and things. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole movement now in Japan about recycling and reclaiming, and that's all really coming out of Tohoku. And nobody's sort of embarrassed about it, and actually going and asking for just to ask companies for donations. Our staff are fine at doing that. What's really interesting is the reaction you get at some of these companies that they still push back. They still don't quite know. Can we have the last year's air conditioning unit? We don't want the latest one, the last year's toilet cover, whatever from Toto, whatever. Although Toto have been really fantastic, actually. But it's just really interesting that this is actually changing the way Japan operates. And that's been another great benefit from.
So to wrap things up for this panel anyway, I'd say that we've kind of been able to establish that I mean, it's a very multifaceted kind of dynamic up there, right? It's not, just get money and volunteers up there and do something, right? It's, well, there's got to be space to do something. There's got to be people both going to and going out and coming back to, right? There has to be, again, this really goes down to kind of community and what is community, what comprises community. It's not just saying, hey, we're in a circle and, haha, magically we're somehow together. It's actually building these relationships. And I think really in 2011, the word of the year, right, was Kizuna. And I think that is one of the most pertinent things I've ever heard in my life. That describes it entirely, really. It's how to build these connections. And I think with what each of you are doing is approaching connection building in kind of from a different angle, in a different way. And after 5 years, like Mark, you were saying, reconstruction is a long, long process, and it does not take, a year. It doesn't take 5. It probably doesn't even take 10. But it is that step-by-step sort of process. And with what you guys are doing, I think that we've gotten off to a great start. So thank you very much.